All right, Janice, you ready to introduce our speaker?
I am. Very exciting. I've said before, and Sandy, I've told everybody, being locked down obviously isn't, what we all want, but it really has afforded us to have some wonderful speakers remote that we would never get to hear from. So I'll call that a bonus of the lockdown. There's so few. So everybody, Sandy Rosenthal she founded the nonprofit levees.org in 2005. The group's focus is educating the public that the flooding of New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina was due to federal engineering mistakes and not the wrath of the nature. She has a book that was released in August of 2020, Words Whispered in Water. And it's about how, against all odds, she changed the national narrative about the flooding disaster. In March of 2019, Sandy unveiled the Flood House Museum at a major breach site. She initiated the installation of 3 historic plaques vetted by the state's preservation office, hosts an annual levee breach bike tour, and much more. For those efforts, Sandy's been honored with numerous awards, most recently including Outstanding Social Entrepreneur of the Year for the Tulane University and Most Influential Woman from Mount Holyoke College. Rosenthal is an advocate for the 55% of the American population living in counties protected by levees. Powerful message is bringing light to a mostly unknown yet dangerous situation in many parts of our country, and she is an inspiration on how to truly mobilize citizen participation. And so with that, Sandy, welcome. We're all very excited to hear your talk today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very nice introduction. I needed to change something in it. It turns out that 62% of the American population is protected by levees, or at least living by levees. Protection is another matter. And I only learned this because FEMA finally responded to my Freedom of Information request, and I just received this just 6 weeks ago. 62%, nearly 2/3 of the American population lives in counties protected by levee. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start because I know you all don't have all day. I'm going to share my PowerPoint first. And I assume everybody will be muted for the next few minutes while I talk. Yeah, I see they are. Good. Okay. That makes it easier for all of us. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. And I'm also going to give everyone a little secret that they can use all the time, even when they're not listening to my PowerPoint, and that is how to make the speaker big. Since I can't be there with you, at least my head can be big on your screen. So this is something that if you have a laptop or a desktop, you can do right now. So take your cursor and bring it up to the top of your screen. Just bang it up against the top of the screen, and the green bar will suddenly drop down. Okay, and at the far right of that little green bar, is a black box. Click on it. Okay, options are going to come down. A drop-down menu will appear. The very bottom option says side-by-side mode. The very bottom option. Click on it. Okay, so far so good. Right now you should have 2 screens. You should have my PowerPoint on the left, and there should be pictures on the right. Now, if there's just one picture, just me, you're good, okay? Don't do anything for the next couple of seconds. But if you see a whole bunch of other people on the right, you need to go to the top of your screen on the right side and click on Speaker View. So if you see Speaker View up there, go click on it right now, because I want only me and my PowerPoint. I don't want you looking at anything else. Now, there's one last thing, and this is a secret that you'll know for every PowerPoint you ever look at from now on. If you look at the left side of the photograph of me, okay, the box with me in it, on the left side, 2 little white lines about in the middle of the box. Put your cursor on it, click and drag, or this way, drag this way, and my PowerPoint will get smaller, and the picture of me will get bigger. Ta-da! So now all of you have a secret. If you didn't follow that, or just something didn't work quite right, it's okay. It's okay. Everything's going to be fine. These are just little secrets to maximize the Zoom experience, to make it as close to possible as having me right there. Okay, and I'm going to start my PowerPoint now. I'm going to be putting it into presentation mode. Okay, words whispered in water. Always beware when everyone tries to blame mayhem and catastrophe on wind and water, because human beings are always lurking behind those words. Beware. So after the levee breach disaster in 2005, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers blamed the hurricane. And the Army Corps of Engineers refused to answer any questions until all the levee studies were complete. Keep in mind, this was over 350 miles of square miles and 52 breaches. It was a big disaster, but they weren't going to answer any questions. And keep in mind, in the weeks after the disaster, the whole world saw this on television. And they wanted to know what went wrong. I mean, it's human. We want to know now what went wrong. We don't want to wait for the studies to be complete. And it was during this very, very critical time in American history that the people and Congress were given 3 reasons for the catastrophic flooding by the Army Corps of Engineers: monster storm, city below sea level, and they're all corrupt down there in New Orleans. Okay, that was the storyline that was given to the American people in the days, weeks, and months after the storm. And think about it, it's all so believable. I mean, it can't possibly be the Army Corps of Engineers' fault. I mean, the Army Corps has 200 years of experience, a sterling reputation. This is the organization that had built tens of thousands of miles of levees along the Mississippi, the Missouri, and the Ohio rivers. This is the Mississippi right here in front of us. These levees are so well built, they can withstand surges of 20 feet every single year for 30 days or more. They're good, strong levees. The Army Corps can't possibly be at fault. So that's the story we were all being told. Well, I was in an unusual space, shall we put it. After the flood, my husband prior to the flooding, before Hurricane Katrina arrived, my husband told me, Sandy, this is the big one. My husband's in the insurance industry. He said, this is the big one, pack for 3 weeks. And I did. So when I evacuated from the storm, I had all my everything I needed. I had my checkbook, and I was in a relatively secure space to watch the disaster unfold and then to watch the disastrous response. So for me, the big breakthrough was 1 month after the flooding, when I read testimony that the Army Corps of Engineers had given to the Government Accountability Office. Right there on page 3, and you can read with me, the Army Corps is responsible for project design and construction, and local interests are responsible for maintenance of levees and flood control. Well, it seems to me to be blaming the people of New Orleans for the flooding is like blaming a janitor if a building toppled to the ground. Keep in mind that the very worst levee breaches in New Orleans, which the folks of California don't know, but the worst breaches were the brand new ones, the 17th Street and the London. Both were only completed in 2000. It can't possibly be maintenance issues. So I founded the group levees.org and started asking questions, and I'm still asking questions up to this day. I received immediate pushback from the Army Corps and from the engineering establishment, which this only reinforced my certainty. When I got all this pushback, I knew I had to be on the right track. That's a real sign that you're right when you get pushback, okay? The engineering establishment was trying to rewrite history and protect its reputation. So in response to this, my group, levees.org, working with a local group of school kids, we put together a satire where we spoofed that cozy relationship between the Army Corps and the engineering establishment. And well, it turned out the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is a trade group, a big trade group in the country, they didn't like that criticism and threatened my teeny weeny little fledgling grassroots group with lawsuit. Well, it turns out there's laws against that. you're not supposed to threaten lawsuit just to shut somebody up. So Adams and Reese and the wonderful Silicon Valley firm Cooley offered assistance pro bono, and we dared the American Society of Civil Engineers to sue us. And in response, the society withdrew the threat, nothing like a bunch of lawyers, and Levy.org announced this news at a very well-attended press conference. So this is to give you a taste of the sorts of stuff I have had to put up with and just trying to get the truth out. And this is just a taste, okay? Over the next 3 years, as the introduction said, we put historic plaques in the ground. We pushed for federal reform of the Army Corps of Engineers. And in another very embarrassing moment for the Army Corps of Engineers, I caught them myself, actually, and I'm not a techie. I caught them using their own computers to harass me online. That was a rather delicious moment. I mean, when you do bad things, you're going to get caught. So anyway, by now it's 6 years after the flooding. It's 2011, and on the suggestion of an advisor, Glenn Corbett, who I respect deeply, he suggested that my group nominate two levee breach sites to the National Register of Historic Places, because this breach event was a historic event that actually changed America as we know it, even though you may not be aware. And this is important because, as I've already mentioned, 62%, almost 2/3 of the American population lived by levees. So the big picture began to get clear when I was working on the nomination. I was forced to read all those reports that we talked about. Most of them came out in 08 and 09, okay? It takes years to do an investigative report. And I discovered information very deep, like on page 300 of these reports, that wasn't even in the executive summary. So that's another lesson. Read the whole report, not just the summary. And I found information that even experts, Iva Van Heerden and John Barry, who are truly experts, I found stuff even they didn't know, okay? And the big picture became clear. The Army Corps of Engineers is singularly at fault, not partially, not mainly, singularly responsible for the flooding. Not the storm, not the geography of the city, and certainly nothing any local official did or did not do. So here we are, though, in 2011. That fairy tale is very firmly in the minds of most Americans. So what do? And by now, I also had a lot of detractors. Paid trolls, moderating forums on the local newspaper, bloggers for the American Society of Civil Engineers, all those Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists who had won prizes putting out the wrong information. Not that it's their fault, that's all they knew at the time, but they didn't like the truth coming out. Published authors, et cetera, you get the idea. A lot of people wanted the old wrong theory to remain out there. Okay, I can't. Okay, here we go. And let me see, make sure I didn't miss something. Okay, and all these people and organizations pushing back were all saying the same thing. It took me a while to realize they were all quoting the same thing. They were all quoting a 2006 early report by University of California, Berkeley. Now, to be fair, this California Berkeley-led study, to be fair, it was the first report. By definition, it was published without access to any other report. It was published without access to critical data at that time, on a shoestring budget and an insane deadline. What could go wrong? Okay? Well, this is what went wrong. They had a wrong conclusion. They concluded that the Army Corps had tried for years to get authorization to install floodgates that would have stopped the flooding of New Orleans. It would have been superior. But local interaction and local dysfunction stopped the installation. Well, there's a problem with that conclusion. It was wrong. It was erroneous. There's not even a kernel of truth in it. And that was what all of my detractors were saying years and years after it was already debunked. So what do? You got this fairy tale. What do? Well, the good doctors who co-chaired that report, Drs. Bob B., Ray Seed, and Dave Rogers, they understood when my organization brought this to their attention. They understood that this wrong conclusion was actually hurting people. It was actually making us look like, all New Orleanians are irresponsible and a burden to the nation. So they offered to write a new report, and that new report would retract the wrong conclusion and replace it with the right one, namely, that the Army Corps made a tragic mistake when they conducted what was called the E99 study in the 1980s. They were looking for ways to save money on steel. Steel sheet pilings anchoring the flood walls were too short. And when Hurricane Katrina's surge arrived, the walls broke when they were still 4 feet from the tops of the walls. They were under-engineered. So after the article's debut in Water Policy, all these major newspapers and all the major media stopped promoting that fairy tale that needed to be debunked. It took a while, but we succeeded, and I discussed my journey in my book, Words Whispered in Water, Why the Levees Broke in Hurricane Katrina, which has been #1 new release for 8 months and turns up as a page turner. Everyone that reads it finishes it in 1 or 2 sittings. So, but I'm not going to talk too much about my book. What's more important is that we discuss the issue, and thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you, Sandy. If anyone has questions at this time, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Hi, Sandy.
Bill Ellington.
Go, Bill.
Okay. I was kind of involved in that because I had a building about 90 miles from Hurricane Katrina. But there was some poor guy who had a care home for older people, and quite a few of them, it flooded and they got killed, and he was arrested for not evacuating. And he went to court and he said, hey, we've been here 50 years. We've never been inundated with water. It was the Army Corps of Engineers problem. And he proved that in court, and he got found not guilty of, basically causing those people's death.
Sal Mangano, and his wife Mabel. And the name of the book, there's a book about it, and the attorney who represented them, his name is James Cobb.
Yes.
Very sad story.
Yes.
None of us knew that the levees could break. There was no warning that the levees could break. And I know I've researched it to death. Nobody warned us the levees could break. The worst we were worried about was overtopping of the levees, which is inconvenient and messy, but not deadly.
Yeah, and I guess what caused it is the Army Corps of Engineers had gone in and cleaned out everything from New Orleans way down to the ocean. And so the hurricane had a clear path without obstructions to get to New Orleans.
There's multiple reasons that that St. Bernard Parish, that's where this terrible flooding was, where all the people in the nursing home perished, was absolutely tragic. Not all of them, but many of them. The reason that was St. Bernard Parish, that's outside of New Orleans, and it's twofold. One of the reasons, which I'm sure you might have heard of, is the MR-GO, the Mississippi Gulf River Outlet, which was a bad engineering idea from the get-go, and that allowed saltwater intrusion, which killed buffering wetlands, which protect New Orleans. So it didn't happen overnight. It took about 50 years. And that's about how long we had gone without a major hurricane, about 50 years.
That's right.
Other questions? John?
Andy, what's the status of the levees in that part of the world today?
Sure. I'm most happy to tell you that. To the Army Corps' credit, they did better. Okay, the government gave them $14 billion to build a better system. It's better. They came in and they spent most of their attention at the weakest and most disturbing mistakes. You know, they built a wall to prevent surge coming in through from the Gulf. They built floodgates now, which should have been built in the first place. But the Army Corps decided not to build them. They weren't forced not to build them, but that's a detail. But the important thing is we have the floodgates now to prevent surge. And the Army Corps has spent a time and money on getting it better. Notice I said better. You will not find one single expert an engineering expert who will say to you that they think this is the proper system for a city of our number of people and amount of property and infrastructure. We have something called 100-year flooding, which is what everybody in the country gets, 100-year flooding. A major city like New Orleans, which is a port, 50% of all the barges in the country are going through here. It should have 500-year or 1,000-year protection, which would not have cost much more, negligently more. But the Army Corps of Engineers is only authorized to build what it's authorized to build. But I hope that's a good answer for your question.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I have a question. Are there other areas in the country that you're focusing on now that are vulnerable to these types of problems?
More people in California are at risk of levee failure, serious risk, than Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana combined, especially the Sacramento area. Levees there seriously need attention. Keep in mind, the Army Corps of Engineers is in charge. You saw what happened here. So the whole country should be paying very careful attention to what the Army Corps of Engineers is doing. You should not just sit back and relax and feel that you're protected. Now, in the Netherlands, you could go up to anybody in the Netherlands. The entire country is below sea level. Some places it's 30 or 40 feet below sea level. And if you ask them, do you know how far below sea level you live? And they will go, I don't know. They expect their government to take care of them. They expect it, and the government does. They spend a lot of money on flood protection. That's not the case here in New Orleans, where the federal government has a tendency to let the states take care of things and let the states worry about themselves. So because of that, that is my final note on that is, yes, California should be paying very, very close attention to its levees that are built by the federal government and maintained by locals.
All right, thank you.
Neil, are you?
Yeah, are dams of the 62% in the country, are dams included as part of these levees?
No, dams are under a separate roof, for lack of a better word. You've got we had the Dam Safety Act. I'm not being obnoxious. The Dam Safety Act a long time ago. The first Levee Safety Act was passed after the levees broke during Hurricane Katrina. The dams have always been under the watchful eye, maybe not well enough. As you know, 2 dams breached and flooded out a lot of people in Michigan as recently as this past June. Okay, so but the answer is no. The 62% is referring to specifically to levees, not dams.
Other questions? Mark.
Yes, Sandy, is there a plan in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again? I know you kind of hit on some stuff, but is there like a plan?
Well, I can say this. There's nothing like a disaster to wake people up. And the entire country got a wake-up call when New Orleans flooded as badly as it did. But to its credit, the Army Corps of Engineers has completely changed the way they require maintenance, which is a good thing for all people. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers used to be a bit lax on the levee maintenance responsibilities. But this is how it works. Federal government builds the levee, hands it to the locals, they maintain it under the Army Corps' rules. Army Corps used to be pretty relaxed about it, not anymore. Now they have the local levee boards come in and do it every 3 months, okay, 4 times a year. It used to be once a year. And so that's just one of the examples, and I could go on, and it's in that water policy article, what the Army Corps now requires of the states, which is a good thing, no matter how you look at it. So more robust maintenance, more frequent maintenance inspections, and also the Army Corps of Engineers no longer uses the type of walls that failed in New Orleans when it comes to rebuilding. They're called eye walls. And I didn't want to get into the weeds. I doubt there's a single civil engineer in the audience. If so, hello, but probably not. And so I didn't get into the detail, but an eye wall is not a good wall to protect people with. Cattle and farmland, yes. people and their property know.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sandy. Sandy, I have one question. I know that becoming an activist, an advocate is a challenge. It's difficult. It requires a lot of character strength and tenacity. Do you have any advice? Like, can you describe, like, what does it take? What is the process? Suppose I'm seeing an issue that needs advocacy, and I see some corruption and some miscommunication and some misassumption and some blame that's misassigned. How do I approach these issues? What does it take? How do you gain advocates? What do you do to even begin a process like the one that you have undertaken?
My book had an entire chapter devoted to that question. And
Yeah.
when I got a publisher, the publisher told me that chapter had to go because my book was too long. So I'm going to condense that chapter right now for you. The first thing is, to believe in yourself. If you've thoroughly researched the issue, believe in yourself and just keep reminding yourself you're right. And just because you're getting pushback means you're wrong. If you're getting pushback, it means you're on the right track. So you need to have faith in yourself, create shield to protect yourself from the bombardment of pushback, which will come. And pushback can be abusive comments, harassment. Be prepared for that. It means you're on the right track, and just don't take it personally. I'm a big believer in exercise. I get exercise 6 days a week, be it yoga or playing tennis or even just going for a brisk walk. Something about exercise, it takes big problems and turns them into little problems. A third thing is no one can do anything alone. Nobody. You can lead alone, but that's it. You have to have broad support. You have to have other organizations or at least a core group of at least 15, 20 people to get anything important done. And I think those are the main things. And a good night's sleep.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Janice.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the Sacramento area, which we're only a couple hours away from, and we call that the Delta. And it really, it wouldn't concern us property-wise where we live, but it would concern the farmers and different things like that out there, I imagine. Who do we check with to make sure that that's all being properly maintained and that they're following what the engineers are saying? It doesn't happen.
I'm going to give you an answer that doesn't cost a dime. File a request under the Freedom of Information Act. Doesn't cost a penny. That 62% figure that I keep talking about, when I first asked about that, I heard that the number was 43. I went, well, that's a big number. Where are these levies? And I asked FEMA, where are those levies? And how many people are in them? Took a year to get the answer, but they sent me the answer and it turned up as 55. And then I refiled it and now it's 62 because it's been 10 years. But my point is, it doesn't cost a dime. And ask your questions. If they don't respond, FEMA takes forever, but most other organizations have to acknowledge receipt. Oh, excuse me, I take that back. FEMA did acknowledge receipt of my request, and they're required to within 3 weeks. If they don't acknowledge it, just keep asking them, where's my response? And also, if you have an attorney friend, submit your request for information with their letterhead on it, because then it goes straight to the agency's attorney, and they have to pay attention. Okay, and none of this costs a dime unless get an attorney friend like I did. He doesn't charge me.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't be spending your own money. That's what I like to do. I like to keep the cost down. Or that'll break you first, the money.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Well, Sandy, this has been incredible. Thank you so much. It's been informative, and we certainly applaud your tenacity and your willingness to endure the pushback to bring things that needed to be brought to light. And we need a lot more people like you. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And we bless you, and we wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
You're so welcome. Y'all take care.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sandy.